Good evening, Tamar. Thank you very much for introducing me. Good evening, everybody. Indeed, it's a little bit strange. I'm now in Zagreb, in Croatia. The Center for Jewish Art undertakes a research expedition to survey Jewish monuments in this country. But today we will speak about Lithuania. And let's see how we can look at Lithuania from Croatia. So I will share my screen. And we can start. So our talk today is the first of 3 talks, which will be devoted to the synagogues in the Russian and Jewish cemeteries and Jewish material culture in the Russian Empire. And we start today with a lecture which I called "The Land of Wooden Synagogues." That is the Republic of Lithuania of today. And the reason that I called the lecture about Lithuania, the land of wooden synagogue, is that in the 90s and even today, there are about 15 preserved wooden synagogues in this country, more than anywhere else in Europe. And when we say wooden synagogues, the majority of you probably think about something magnificent like the synagogue in Kidani, which you see on the left of your screen. But when I speak about wooden synagogues, I also include small, modest, ordinary buildings like this one from Utena. And here I would like to quote my friend, a good colleague, Samuel Gruber, who says there are wooden synagogues and there are the wooden synagogues. So these magnificent wooden synagogues, what he calls the wooden synagogues, we will speak about them, and we will speak also about small ordinary buildings. But before we go to the synagogues, let's first understand where Lithuania is and how we should look at Lithuania. So everybody here in the audience, I believe, knows where Lithuania is today, especially people from Lithuania whom I saw in the audience. Yeah, it's a relatively a small country in Eastern Europe on the shore of the Baltic Sea. But this is the situation today. Not always Lithuania was here, and especially not always Lithuania was bordering the Baltic Sea. In the Middle Ages, in the 15th, 16th century, Lithuania, the Grand Duchy of Lithuania, was a huge state in Eastern Europe, which almost has nothing to do with the Baltic Sea. But as historians, especially Lithuanian historians, like to draw it, it was situated between the Baltic and the Black Sea. Of course, it's a kind of exaggeration because the Grand Duchy of Lithuania never commanded or had some visible power on the northern banks of the Black Sea, but doesn't matter. It was a huge, important late medieval state, which was situated between Russia and the steppe and Tatar states on the steppe of Crimea, and Europe, especially first of all, of course, the Kingdom of Poland. In this time when Lithuania was so great and controlled a lot of lands, and ethnic Lithuanian lands which are here, and ethnic Slavic lands, what remained from the ancient Kievan Rus, the proto-Russian or proto-Ukrainian principalities here around Kiev. In this period, there were almost no Jews in Lithuania, and more Jews arrived to the Great Duchy of Lithuania after it was united with the Kingdom of Poland in 1569. The Kingdom of Poland here and the Grand Duchy of Lithuania, truncated already, as you see, they signed a union by which they organized a common state, which we call Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. So this state had the same head, who was called the King of Poland in Poland and the Great Duke of Lithuania in Lithuania, but they had common foreign policies, but in reality, the interior organizations of the state, the money, the taxes, and all other things which we call interior, they were different in Poland and Lithuania. And in this situation, when it is the Grand Duchy of Lithuania inside of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, Lithuania existed until the late 18th century, when the whole Commonwealth was partitioned between the neighboring empires, Russia, Prussia, and Austria. So every state got, every empire got pieces from Poland and Lithuania, and the whole Lithuanian territory in 3 pieces was annexed to the Russian Empire. And that's why we speak about the synagogues in Lithuania in the lecture series about the synagogues and Jewish culture and Jewish material culture in the Russian Empire. So the last partition, the third partition, which removed the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth from the map of Europe, took place in 1795. And after it, for more than a century, Lithuania was part of the Russian Empire. You can see it is situated here inside of the Great Russian Empire. After the First World War, when Russian Empire disintegrated like the German Empire and Austrian Empire, and I'm sitting now in Croatia, which was part of the Austrian Empire at that time, Austro-Hungarian, Austro-Hungarian Empire. So when the empires disintegrated, the age of nation states came, and Lithuania was organized as an independent state, as the Republic of Lithuania in 1918, and it existed as independent Republic of Lithuania until the Second World War, when it was in 1940, it was annexed by the Soviet Union. So Soviet Union is the heir of the Russian Empire. So again, Lithuania found itself under the Russian or Soviet Soviet imperial state. And only in 1999, when the Soviet Union collapsed, Lithuania was one of the first, or even the first republic of the Soviet Union, which declared its independence and restoration of its independence from the interwar period. So today, Lithuania is an independent state in Eastern Europe, part of the European Union. From the Jewish point of view, Lithuania, today's Lithuania, the Republic of Lithuania, is a kind of strange thing because it's part of larger Jewish geographical area, which was understood by Jews as one cultural historical area. And it's also called in English Lithuania, but to distinguish it, I would use the Yiddish term, Lite. For Jews, all this Lithuania of today and Belarus of today and part of today's Latvia, it was a region of Lite, and Jews of Lite, they differed from Jews of other regions of Europe, of Jews of Poland, Jews of Ukraine, and other Jews. So from Jewish point of view, Lithuania and Belarus, like it was the Great Duchy of Lithuania in the 17th and 18th century, so this existence of this imaginary geography continued along the 19th century and even the beginning of the 20th century. So our lecture today we will be built according to the periodization that I just described. We will speak about first about the period of Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, and we will speak about the period of Russian Empire, of independent Lithuania, Soviet Union, Soviet Socialist Republic in the Soviet Union, and the Republic of Lithuania of today. So let's try and start to speak about the synagogues. And first, let's see what happened with synagogues in the Grand Duchy of Lithuania, part of Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. We know already from the late 14th century, we have mentions of synagogues. And you see, I wrote here several first mentions of synagogues that we know. And if you look here, you see the first synagogue we have heard about is in Grodno. The second one is in Brest. The third one, we have even building permission for a synagogue in Pinsk. All these three cities are situated in today's Belarus, not in today's Lithuania. And only the two last one in this list, Troki and Vilna or Vilnius, they mentioned the synagogues mentioned in the 16th century. So it's relatively late in if we look at Jewish Lithuania and Belarus together. And there is a reason for it. In the Jewish mental maps, I said that all the Great Duchy of Lithuania was considered to be one territory called Lita. But the Jews of Lita, they look at the territory and didn't see it homogeneous completely, but they distinguished between the northern part of this area, which we call Zamet, and it's usually written in Hebrew. In today's Hebrew is Zamut, but Vav was read in Yiddish as E, so it's Zamet. And the eastern part was called by Jews Reisen or Reisen, but it's derived from the name Rus, Belarus. So Reisen is coming from there. And all the territory in the center was considered Lita proper. It didn't have a special name, so in order to call it somehow, we will use this word Lita proper. So the Jewish settlement in the Great Duchy of Lithuania started from Lita proper, and we see that Lithuanian Jews from the 17th century Lithuanian Jewry was organized in Vad Lita. Vad Lita, so it's an umbrella organization of Jewish communities, which was mostly responsible for gathering taxes from Jews and transferring them to the state. And it was organized in an interesting way. There were several major communities, and they took all the representatives of those communities. They made all the decisions, and there were other communities which had no other choice but to fulfill those decisions. Especially, you can imagine when you speak about taxes and division of taxes. So it was quite an important matter to discuss, but only major representatives of major communities, they participated in the meetings of the Council of Lita, Vad Lita, and made decisions. So which communities are the major communities? And they were the first It's Grodno, Brest, Grodno, and Pinsk. These were the three first major communities, and only in the mid 17th century, Vilna was joining them as a major community, and later also Slutsk joined as a major community. So this was the territory where Jewish settlement started, and from here, probably from here, Jews moved to the north, to Zamet, and they moved to the east to Reisen or Reisen. And synagogues reflect this movement of Jews, and synagogues reflect the standing of local communities, their size, their wealth, their importance, their prosperity. So let's see what we know about the synagogues. From the 17th century, if we speak about the synagogues built of stone or bricks, masonry synagogue, we know only, 5, 6 buildings in the territory of Jewish Lithuania. Of them, only one in Vilnius is situated in the territory of the Republic of Lithuania of today. All the rest are in Belarus. Yeah? So, and probably we know all buildings, all stone buildings from the 17th century, because such huge buildings usually do not disappear without traces, and if they survive, I think that maybe we don't know another 5 synagogues or 3 synagogues, not too much. So we see that in the north, here, there are no, in the 17th century, there are no great masonry synagogues, only the synagogue in Vilna. And this synagogue, I believe that most of you know it and saw photographs and plans, so I will show again the photographs. It was really great synagogue, which was called the Stadtschule, the synagogue of the city. It was organized as a typical 17th century East European synagogue with prayer hall and 4 massive columns which supported the vaults. We can see them. The bima was an elaborate structure in between those 4 columns. And if we speak about this bima, I cannot not to mention the excavations by John Seligman of Israeli Antiquities Authorities, which were done before the corona, and in those excavations he found the remnants of this bima, the floor of the bima, and here you can see this is a base of one of these huge columns which supported the wall. So this is the only 17th century synagogue which we know in the territory of today's Lithuania. But if we look at the 18th century synagogues, again on stone synagogues built in the 18th century, we will see that the majority of synagogues which we know, again, are situated in Lita proper, and among them 3 synagogues in the territory of today's Lithuania, and I wrote dates here. All of them are dated by the very end of the 18th century. And only 3 synagogues, large synagogues that we know in Zamet. Also the very end of the 18th century, in the time of partitions. What can we learn from this list? Why we need this list? We can, again, and we know probably the majority of stone synagogues. So what we can understand, there are 2 reasons for this phenomenon, that there are a small number of stone synagogues in the territory of today's Lithuania. The first one, that the communities there were not very rich and not very important, that they couldn't afford themselves to build huge masonry buildings. Yeah, so always there are a lot of communities, but they couldn't, beside Vilna and several others, they couldn't build huge stone synagogues. And the second reason is that some of the great synagogues were abandoned in the 19th century. And we see from historical sources, from newspapers, from memoirs, but memoir usually says, yeah, there was a great synagogue and several Batei Midrash around it. When there came a fire, the great synagogue, all of them burned down. Batei Midrash were restored, and the great synagogue was not. And this is probably the reason why we don't know a little bit more stone synagogues here, but we definitely it will help us to understand why we don't know more wooden synagogues. So great synagogues were not restored in the late 19th century after fires, and this is a wonderful example. This is the great synagogue in Viliampole, or which we know as Slobodka, a suburb of Kaunas, Kovno. Though it was burned down in 1892, and this ruin was not restored. It's not because there were no Jews in Kaunas or in Slobodka. There were thousands of Jews. It was not important for them to restore this huge synagogue, and it stood as ruin until 1930 when it was dismantled. So it stood as ruin quite late, so it could be photographed. And the photographs usually we have from the beginning of the 20th century, not before. So this one synagogue was photographed while others were not. And later it disappeared, it was dismantled because nobody needed it. Let's look at another stone synagogue, and it will help us with speaking about wooden synagogue. So this is the great synagogue in Kedainen, or Kidani, Keidan in Yiddish. A relatively large building, prominent building, built in the very end of the 18th century. It started in 1784. It's interesting that this synagogue, its exterior resembles the exterior of Calvinist church in Kedainen, which was built in the 17th century by local lords, Radzivills. So this synagogue, you see, it has pilasters and arches, such shallow arches, exactly like the church. But the church is much larger and much more magnificent than the synagogue. So for Jews, for local Jews, it was an important model, local church belonging to the owners of the town. And we also have several photographs of its interior, and especially the photograph of the Torah Arc. And I would like to draw your attention to those wonderful wooden carved Torah Arc. Bracha Yaniv wrote a book about them, so I wouldn't speak too much about those amazing arcs and the symbolism involved with them, but I would like to point only to several small details that may help us to understand those arcs and to understand those arcs in the wooden synagogues as well, because it was the same idea. You build an arc in a stone synagogue or in a wooden one. And the main idea behind this multi-tiered Torah arc is the Talmudic saying about three crowns, which goes that there is a crown of Torah, the crown of priesthood, and the crown of kingship. And it adds that the crown of good name is above them all. So crown of good name doesn't play any role here, but here we see that the tiers of the arc are divided accordingly. We have crown of Torah. Here, maybe I will enlarge it. We have the crown of Torah, which crowns the tablets of the law, of course. Here we have Leviathan and the bull symbol, which are setting us to the Messianic time, doesn't matter. Above it, there is a crown of priesthood. How we don't know that it's crown of priesthood? Because we have priestly blessing, hence a priestly blessing here. And above them all is the crown of kingship. It's not seen here very well, but we will look in another photographs in a minute. And before we go finish here, I would just to mention that in several Torah arcs in Lithuania, which we know, here are the calendar. The Jewish calendar for many years was prepared and put on the columns of the Torah Arc. So let's see a Torah Arc in the wooden synagogue in Valkinienkai, and we have this same story. Yeah, we have Leviathan again send us to Messianic times. It will be very good when Messiah will come. Here we have the crown of Torah with tablets. Here we have a crown of priesthood with priestly blessing, and above them all crown, and it says Keter Malchut, crown of kingship, crowning a double-headed eagle. And this wonderful eagle, it's not the Russian state eagle, which people used to say. And even in the 19th century, there were people who say, oh, look, we are so we are so good citizens, not citizens, there is no citizens in Russia, of course, as the subject of the Tsar, so that we put the Russian eagle above the Torah Arc. It's not about the Russian eagle, it's not about Austrian eagle. Again, speaking from the territory of Austro-Hungarian Empire, we should remember that the Austrian emperors also had the double-headed eagle. But it's a Jewish eagle representing God, and sometimes we have here even the tetragrammaton saying that it's God, and here we see that this eagle, it holds a shofar and lulav, very Jewish double-headed eagle crowned as God with Keter Malchut, the crown of kingship. So this photograph was taken from in the wooden synagogue of Valkinienka, and it brings us finally to the discussion of wooden synagogues in Lithuania. So again, I prepared the list. What we see that there are much more wooden synagogues, which we know from depictions, from photographs, in all three regions of Jewish Lithuania, and also much more wooden synagogues in the territory of the Republic of Lithuania of today, starting from here, from Prinai, Valkinienka, Vilkaviškis, and the entire Zamet. It's today's Lithuania, and probably we don't know much more synagogues which did not survive to the era of photography. As I showed you with synagogue in Slobodka, great synagogues were not restored after fires of the 19th century, of late 19th century. So probably we don't know tens of other great wooden synagogues, magnificent wooden synagogues which existed in the territory. So let's look at them. Some basic things. I think I believe that most of you saw those photographs somewhere or in other lectures. Wooden synagogues, they do not resemble churches, but they have very high roofs. And the reason for having those roofs so high, not only because there is snow in Lithuania and you need a steep roof, the snow will fall down, but also because those high roofs, they hide the interior domes which cover the prayer hall. Inside, we are not seen from outside, so from outside it's something non-Christian, definitely not non-Christian. Inside there is a dome, which could be understood as Christian, could be not, because everybody likes domes, especially for a public or religious building. This is, for example, the great synagogue in Kedainen. Also, we see this roof is wonderful roof, covers an interior dome inside, and we, by chance, we also have a photograph of the Torah Arc in this Kedainen synagogue, and you see it's again divided into tiers. The lower tier where the Torah scrolls are kept with menorah. Let me enlarge it, with menorah on the doors, and then we go tier by tier again with crowns, the system of crowns, the crown of Torah, the crown of priesthood, and the crown of kingship above the eagle, which tops the Torah. Another example of a synagogue in Tabas or Retava, in Russian it's Retava, also with high roof, again, high roof which conceals interior dome, and the Torah Arc of several tiers. Unfortunately, it's one of the cases where we have such a good photograph, but there is a problem to read the date. There is an inscription there which includes the date, but we were not able to decipher the part of inscription which gives the date of this Torah. There were a little bit among those great, magnificent synagogues. There were more modest synagogues like this, Shaulenai or Shablane in Russian, Shablan in Yiddish. But the idea is the same. Yeah, it's a square building with high roof which hides interior dome. Here are some additional premises, sometimes for women, sometimes for other communal needs, like Kahal Shtu, the office of the community, so we're situated somewhere here. And inside every synagogue, of course, has a bima in the center, and you see that bimot in the wooden synagogues, they also were made, like we saw in the great synagogue of Vilna. It was elaborate structure, Baroque masonry structure. Here, the bima is wooden, and but it's also elaborate and also produces this special stresses this special place from which the Torah scroll is being read. It's why all these beautiful things are coming to honor the Torah and the ceremony of Torah reading. The majority of wooden synagogues that we know in Lithuania and in other countries, we know from 1 or 2, maybe 3 photographs, which do not explain us the historical development of those synagogues. So looking at this photograph, we can understand that the main building, this main building is 18th century, because we know other 18th century synagogues. When this attachment for women was made, we have no idea, because it does not have enough architectural material for dating, so probably it's somewhere 19th century. And this attachment, Western attachment, it's received in the 20th century because of its architecture, but we cannot be more specific. And this synagogue in Vilkaviškis is the only example that I know, but by chance we have depiction of it before reconstruction and after reconstruction. So what we see now is the depiction of after reconstruction. And this is how it looked like in 1887. So we see it was completely different. The main part is still here, the prayer hall covered with high roof, but the attachments on the western side are quite different And so we were right that this was built in the early 20th century, replacing the such picturesque attachments which existed probably from the 19th or even from the 18th century. It's very hard to date those things. And another thing I would like to show you about these magnificent wooden synagogues, but some that attachments are very non-important for the community. Community invests in the main building, which contains the prayer hall. This is the sacred space of the community, the main communal space, the main space invested with sacredness and allusions to the Temple of Jerusalem. And all the attachments around are not so important, not for women, not for communal office. So we see that here the synagogue again from the 18th century, a wooden synagogue. It was in the 19th century where for brick attachments, nobody cares. So we attach brick, we have money, so we build from brick things which we need for this synagogue. All around it in the early 20th century, those brick things, attachments were removed, and we see the traces of them here, and some wooden vestibule was added instead of the old brick vestibule. So wood or brick could be, nobody cares. It's like for the brick synagogues or stone synagogues, we have wooden attachments. Here stone attachments to the wooden synagogue. And just to see, if we speak about the synagogue in Kidani, we also have two photographs, very poor photographs of the Torah Arc, but the Arc is really, really amazing. So all this was about the 18th century. What happens in Lithuania in the 19th century under the Russian rule, when today's Lithuania is simply 1.5 provinces of the Russian Empire. I believe, and I spoke about it a couple of times already, but I believe that it was possible only under the Russian rule and not under the Polish-Lithuanian rule, that the Great Synagogue of Vilnius installed this gable made of two colonnades. One colonnade is Corinthian, we can see here with four Corinthian columns, and here 12 Doric columns. Sorry, which should be. I didn't put here the photo, an earlier photograph before additional columns were removed. So there were 12, originally 12 columns here. Why to put such colonnades on the gable? Nobody enters through this gable. It's even hard to see this gable from the street, because Jewish street is very narrow, like other streets in the old city of Vilnius. And I think that here we can see that originally there were 12 columns in the lower colonnade. I think that it was a Jewish answer for the new buildings in Vilnius, the new building of the Vilna Cathedral, Catholic Cathedral, which prominent portico, and the new building of Vilnius City Hall, built in 1799, also with classicist porticos. So I believe the Jews, they also wanted to add to their main building, which served for them as the Jewish cathedral, if you want, the main religious place and space, and also the Jewish town hall, because in the synagogue, in the attachment to the synagogue, the office of the community was situated, and the office of the community is parallel to the city hall for Christians. So for them, it was important to stress that they are also keeping with the fashion of a new style of classicist stylistic, so they added this gable. But Vilna Jews were not alone to add gables and to play with neoclassicism, but it was fashionable in the Russian Empire. And this is a wonderful photograph of the wooden synagogue in Shedova. And we see that here there is also a portico with Doric columns, very proportionate portico. Impressive. Okay, Shedova is a very small shtetl, so the synagogue is not very big, and the portico is not very big. What is the problem with this portico? Would we be in all together in one auditorium? I would ask what is the problem, and I would expect to answer. But here I cannot hear your answer, so I will tell by myself. Portico, the idea of portico, that it leads to the entrance. Yeah, here or here. This point, it's not portico because there is no entrance, it's gable. And in Shedova, we have portico, which leads nowhere. The entrance to the synagogue is here on the right. And the portico precedes one of the windows. So the local community of Shedova, they built synagogue, and here is a date, 1815. They built this wooden synagogue, and they attached portico on the side which looked towards the city, towards the shtetl, just to show that they also go hand by hand with modern fashion in architecture. They also have portico, but this portico does not lead anywhere. In the Russian, during the Russian time, also the Masonry synagogues were built, like this synagogue in Plunge. You see, it's late Baroque, also classicism, classical idioms arrived to the province a little bit later, so Jews are stuck with Baroque forms for much longer than non-Jews, but a huge building which was built in the beginning of the 19th century. And the most interesting synagogue probably, which we know, and we know a lot about it, was built in 1801 in a place called Pakrois, or Pakroi in Yiddish. Wooden synagogue, and you see, it's already 19th century, but structurally it belongs to the 18th century with the high roof. We know now it covers interior dome. And this synagogue was documented in 1938 by local Lithuanian researchers. And we have plenty of photographs of Pakrois synagogue showing Torah Arc and showing Bima and showing murals on the walls of this synagogue, on the women's gallery. So here probably the 4 animals and the camel. Why camel? I don't know. But there are a lot of murals on the walls and on the vault. All of them were made, we know from this documentation, were made in 1895, the end of the century. And there are very interesting things, part of which we understand, part of which we don't understand. So the huge deer above the Torah Arc probably reflects to the Mishnaic saying that run as a deer to serve your creator. What means the depiction of the, obviously this is a Torah Arc with Torah scrolls, we have no idea. We can only speculate. And we also can speculate that those trees all around the synagogue, they send us somehow to paradise and to the future times. Again, lion with an inscription Ari Shoeg Milo Ira, lion representing God. But what is here with books, a table with books, a table with a plant, and the strange column? Sometimes I'm thinking that it's Nilometer from Egypt, but it's nonsense, of course. And my favorite thing in this synagogue is a train. And there are trains in other synagogues as well in depictions. So there is an opinion that like in the 18th century, there were cards depicted on the walls of synagogues which said that the Messiah will come with a card, and it also sends us to Messianic times. Here, it's not anymore horses and a cart, but a train, much more modern thing, which also speaks about Messianic times, that all Messiah will come, probably Messiah will come by train, and then Jews by train will travel to the land of Israel. But it's all speculation. We don't have texts which can explain us those images. So, but not only wooden synagogues were decorated with murals, but stone synagogues and late stone synagogues also were painted. And here is a very small, very nice, very late 19th century synagogue in Czechoslovakia. Let's just to show you the Torah Arc, which is an amazing piece of real folk art. It was probably painted by a local painter who was specializing for advertisements for local shops and nothing more. So the Torah Arc has here depictions. And depictions are of the tribes of Israel. So we have Reuben and Shimon, and Reuben again, and Levi, and Judah, and Issachar with donkey. Yeah, so the person depicted it as he understood it, and the central part of Torah Arc. And well, it's not a very good planning, but it's very naive and charming. And we have here Dan, tribe of Dan with a snake, and tribe of Zebulun with a sheep. And on the other part are the tribes, ending with Benjamin, represented as a wolf. So all the synagogues in Lithuania, or majority of synagogues of Lithuania, they were painted inside somehow, and majority of them probably were painted by local painters, very not sophisticated, but we can say even naive, but very folk, real folk art. What else we should say about the synagogues in Lithuania under the Russian rule? But synagogues, they come in complex. So we see the old wooden synagogue from the 18th century, and next to it, Beit Midrash is built usually of stone. So the main prayer place and main place for study is Beit Midrash, not the great synagogue. We have the same here in Rytavas or here in Ponivez. Yeah, so it's why those wooden synagogues, when they burned down, nobody restored them because there is no need. Everybody prays in Beit Midrash, and Beit Midrash has hidden facilities, so you can use it also during the winter. And sometimes there are more than one Beit Midrash, so there are several synagogues all around the old wooden synagogue, like here in Kelme, the old wooden synagogue of the 18th century, Beit Midrash of the 19th century, and wooden cloys, one or two cloys, and also which where the community members really meet for prayer and study. They don't go, they go to the great wooden synagogue only in summer or only for the high holidays. And we can say that in the Russian time, under the Russian Empire, in the late 19th century, the majority of new synagogues were built of brick, and they looked like these. Oh, not majority, of both synagogues built like of brick, look like this one. But much more synagogues were built of wood, and they looked something like this Hasidic shtibel in Utena. Very simple building, a prayer hall here, excuse me, vestibule on the west, above vestibule women's section, which is somehow connected to the prayer hall. It's not always a good architecture or clear connection. You see here we have two different roofs which meet somewhere here. So this way look the majority, the hundreds of synagogues in Lithuania looked like, and we can see it in this postcard from Birzhai. We see one synagogue, Hasidic synagogue, and Beit Midrash Gadol, and Minyan Walei Tzedek, and Minyan the Shemashim. All of them are wooden. Only the synagogue, great synagogue, is masonry. What happened to it? It's not understandable. Probably it was burned and not restored, only partially restored. So, and the result of it is that all these wooden buildings, they were very easy to disappear, and there were large fires in all shtetls. In the 19th century, when came the First World War, and many of those wooden synagogues burned also, and the majority of them burned in the Second World War. But in Lithuania, as I said, about 15 synagogue buildings wooden synagogue buildings were preserved and are preserved, like this one in Zalimas, or very simple one and rebuilt, completely rebuilt synagogue in Varena. Yeah, we hardly can understand how it was organized, what was added here, but we know that this building was the building of synagogue. Here it's much easier to understand. This is a prayer hall, probably here was the Torah Arc, where we can find the women's section listed. Okay, independent Lithuania. About 20 years of Lithuanian independence. What happens with synagogues? Lithuanian Jews build new synagogues, and we can see them, for example, this synagogue in Shvechna with historicist style, and we see how the synagogue is built according to the original design by the architect. And later, in 28, it looks this way, and in 36, it is already reconstructed. You see, it lost this part of the roof. We don't know why, what happened there. But there are some modernist synagogues in using modernist ideas. But what I like more, that in Lithuania, modernist wooden synagogues were built between two wars. So, for instance, this is designed for a wooden synagogue, the synagogue in Kidani, and this building is still standing. And it's wonderful modernist building with triangle windows and a small tower on the corner, and it looks as a good piece of modernist architecture. During the Soviet time, of course, no synagogues were built. There were only two active synagogues, functioning synagogues in the Soviet Republic of Lithuania, one in Vilnius, one in Kaunas. And the rest of the buildings were used for something, and many of them, since they are halls, so many of them were used as garages or something like this, and gates were cut through the walls, usually from the eastern wall, the place of the Torah Arc, like here in Kroklai and like here in Kedainen. All these buildings were used as clubs or something where you can show movies or show theatrical or give possibility to see some theatrical performances. Or of course, halls for sport are very popular in the buildings of former synagogue. In 1991, the Soviet Union disappeared and the Republic of Lithuania became independent again. And as I said, it was available about 15 wooden synagogues in 1991. And some of them perished since then. For example, this wooden Beit Midrash in Seda, this photograph was made in 1993 by the expedition of the Center for Jewish Art. So 15 years later, it was already collapsing, and today this synagogue does not exist. Or for instance, this small wooden cloise in Plunge, which was destroyed together with the two Masonry synagogues nearby. But the rest of those synagogues were still existing, and I must say that they are also in a good hands, and part of them, especially in the last years, are being restored and renovated. For instance, this synagogue in Atlanta, our expedition in 2004 found it this way. Yeah, abandoned, building abandoned, nobody needs it, closed. But just last year, I received this photograph showing the renovation of this wooden synagogue in Atlanta. Or synagogue in Zhizhmare. It was built probably in 1918 after a fire, large Beit Midrash in Zhizhmare. There is one photograph from before the Second World War, but we found this building abandoned in 1993. Inside, have destroyed used as storage. It didn't change in by 2004. It was still abandoned and with boarded windows. Destroyed from inside. You see, there were 4 columns. Of course, only 2 columns remained. The ceiling only partially remained, but it stood. And in the last years, and our expedition documented it in 2004, were wonderful drawings of my friendly colleague Sergei Kravtsov, showing the situation of this synagogue in 2004. But in 2016 and 2020, this building was restored by the local municipality and the community of the umbrella community of Lithuania Jews. It was restored, and now it looks like new. You see, I don't know what happens inside. I didn't find photographs, and I couldn't travel because of Corona. Of course, I couldn't travel there to see. And it's interesting to know if this inscription on the wall is preserved, because this synagogue, during the Second World War, the synagogue was used twice. First, the Nazis entered here all the Jews of Zhizhmare before taking them to the martyr place. And later, in 1943, the synagogue was used as a working camp for other Jews which built the highway not far from Zhizhmare. And probably this inscription, which says, "Be sure, Lithuanians, your destiny will be the same after the war," written in Polish, probably it belongs to this stage of the working camp. And I don't know if this description is preserved after this extensive renovation, or it was dismissed as a later edition, which is not relevant. We should check. It's another topic which speaks about how you work with the memory about Holocaust. And I would like to finish my talk with a wonderful example of Pakrois, which we saw in the middle of my talk. So the Pakrois synagogue survived in the 20th century, but in very strange shape. This is how we found it in 1993. The high roof is still here, the wooden walls are still here, but very bad condition. And this synagogue was restored by 2017 by the local municipality. So it was restored. It was also restored in the interior. This way, the interior looked in 2004, and Sergei Kravtsov, using the photographs which I showed you earlier, he made a computer model showing all the decoration of the vault and of the prayer hall, using the photographs made before World War II. This reconstruction was very helpful, and today the synagogue is restored, and the restorators even found the remnants of the colors, so they could reconstruct colors because our photographs are, of course, the existing photographs are, of course, black and white. But here, using the colors that they found on place, they were able to reconstruct this synagogue. When we worked on a model of this synagogue of Pokrovsk, on this model, and Sergei Kravtsov succeeded to find one of the persons who was born and grew up in Pokrovsk, in Israel, and he interviewed him. And this person told, why you have Leviathan on the wall, Leviathan keeping his tail in his mouth, and there is a building or city in the center of Leviathan. Now, if Leviathan loses his tail, the world will collapse. So, if this circular figure of Leviathan, it keeps the world together. And now, when this Leviathan is restored, we can say that the world of Lithuanian synagogues continues to exist, and through the numerous restoration projects which we see in Lithuania in the last 5 years, we could be almost sure that other wooden synagogues will be restored as well, or at least they would not disappear, and the world will continue until the Leviathan keeps his tail in his mouth. So thank you very much for your attention. And if Tamar will read me the questions, I will try to answer.
Yeah, thank you very much, Volodya, for taking us on this tour. There are a few questions that came up. I won't be able to read all of them, but we can definitely choose a few interesting ones. For the towns where the synagogues were restored, are there Jewish populations who use these synagogues?
No. This is the interesting thing in Lithuania especially, but also in Latvia and Poland. But there is no Jewish population in all those small shtetl. All local Jews live in large towns, especially the majority of them are in Vilnius and some of them in Kaunas and in other larger towns. So all these synagogues were not needed by the community, and the restoration is on the initiative of the local authorities, and the use is also for the local non-Jewish population. For instance, the synagogue in Pokrovsk, which I showed, serves as a children's library for the children of Pokrovsk.
Okay. Diane has an interesting question. What does KPCA stand for under the credit of the photographs? Is that our organization?
It's organization. It's some Lithuanian abbreviation for one of the governmental offices which keeps the materials, documentation of all buildings. I don't remember. If you would like to know, please all check our book on 2-volume book on Lithuanian synagogues, or write me and I will check it for you.
Okay. Etty has a question regarding the domes of the synagogues. She said that she was taught that city authorities did not allow synagogues to be taller than the tallest church. Is this true?
Yes. The Christian authorities in Catholic Christian authorities in the 17th and 18th century, they were very concerned about synagogues not being higher than the churches and not resembling the churches. That's why the synagogues developed another idioms, architectural idioms, showing themselves off but not being similar to churches. So it would be unacceptable for the Catholic authorities that synagogue has a dome outside. So the dome is hidden inside. In the 19th century, under the Russian rule, it was not so important. Catholic churches was not ruling church anymore. It was the Russian Orthodox Church, which was supported by the state, not the Catholics. And the Russian Orthodox Church usually had no problems with the next lecture we will speak about the problems that the Russian Orthodox Church had with synagogues, but the domes didn't disturb them too much.
Right, okay, I was going to ask you if you can hint to next week, but you gave it away already. Thank you very much for this tour. Lots of different comments in the chat that aren't necessarily questions regarding everyone. I'll try and pass them on to Vladimir. And thank you for joining us, everyone. And we hope to see you again next week. Thank you, Volodya, and good evening, everybody from Bet Avichai.
Thank you, everybody, and have a good evening or good day where you are.
Good day.